Well, hi, everybody. Welcome to our 5th annual Compliance Week keynote speaker. Welcome online if you're watching this via WebEx. I'd encourage you to click the layout button on WebEx and the Show Active Speakers button because it'll give you a better view of both the slides here as well as our speaker. So without further ado, I will introduce our speaker, Mr. Joseph Kermosic. Spanning a 15-year period in the United States and Canada, Mr. Kermosic and his co-accused, they purchased and sold stock with inside information in over 100 separate deals, churning tens of millions of dollars for an eventual 8-figure dollar gain, which is believed to be the most prolonged insider trading case ever uncovered by U.S. and Canadian securities investigators. Mr. Kermosic is a former securities lawyer, and he cooperated with the authorities to absolve many innocent people, professionals, who were inadvertently swept up in his criminal endeavor. He admitted guilt and began a 39-month prison sentence that included stays in 2 notorious maximum security prisons in Canada. His partner in crime and best friend, an American corporate lawyer, however, never made it to sentencing, tragically jumping off a bridge to his death a day before he was scheduled to fly in with Joseph to New York to learn his fate. Joseph's dramatic story forms the basis of the education documentary film called Collared, and we're going to show a little clip from the trailer of that here. And now Joseph gives speeches, either in person or via Zoom or WebEx these days, that offers an unparalleled look on the unforeseeable and human consequences of these sort of criminal actions. His insights, I believe, are critical for all of us who are interested in not only dealing with insider trading, and we just talked about insider trading on our last compliance session, but also just generally from a compliance point of view and how we govern ourselves ethically and with integrity as an organization. His audiences have included investment funds, portfolio managers, law schools, law firms, business schools, regulatory and professional bodies, even the Bank of Canada, and many public corporations and their staff, including now Emera Energy. So with that, I'm very pleased to introduce Mr. Joseph Kermosic to Emera Energy. So I'm going to play his trailer and then we'll go.
My name is Joseph Kermosic. I'm a former lawyer in Ontario. I am the first and perhaps still only Canadian to receive a federal sentence of imprisonment for insider trading. It was an activity that engaged in over 100 separate deals covering 15 years that eventually resulted in my imprisonment and the death of my co-accused.
Around the world, there's over 100 countries that prohibit insider trading, where if you're someone with confidential information, you are an executive or an officer, an employee, and you trade on your knowledge, that's something that we condemn.
Neither of us remembers whose idea was like, we should do this too, but obviously one of us said, let's do this too. My best friend was here because of me and mistakes I made.
Is there a problem on Bay Street? For sure. In some ways, greater risks than in Wall Street or London.
At a certain point in time, we were making so much money trading, so I left the best firm in Canada and then moving down to being a guy trading stock with insider information full time.
If my job is to find reasons why the rules don't apply to you, well, then I can find reasons why they don't apply to me.
Characteristics of psychopathy, such as manipulation, charming, are really valued in business.
My sense is that in the criminal context, we treat crimes that relate to physical harm very seriously and crimes that relate to economic harm a little bit less seriously.
Joseph has certainly paid for his crime. He's lost his best friend, had the most harshest sentence ever for any Canadian in relation to this crime.
He was my best friend, and then he just disappears after, a terrible situation. And I've never filled that void with anyone else or anything else. I could say I think about it every single day.
Thank you very much for having me here today. The educational documentary is Collared. I produced it shortly after release from prison. The goal that I had with the producers was to try to educate professionals to prevent white-collar crime by focusing upon the unforeseeable consequences for the perpetrators of white-collar crime and the people they love and care about, their family, friends, etc. In my own case, I obviously lost all my money. I lost many friends. I lost my reputation. I lost access to my son for 6 years. I didn't have a phone call, a visit, text, nothing, and which was terrible. But of course, it pales in comparison to my co-accused, who was a partner in law from Toronto at that time. His son lost a father, his wife lost a husband, and he lost his life jumping on that from that bridge to his death the day we were supposed to fly, the day before we were supposed to fly to New York to plead guilty to the inside trading. And if I was being completely honest, I believe his last thoughts were of hatred for me and anger towards me, because I think he blamed me for us being in that spot, because at the end of the thing, I didn't take the same precautions I did at the beginning, and that eventually allowed us to be identified and prosecuted and led him to be at the top of the bridge, jumping over. And, this is one of those unforeseeable or consequences you can never imagine. I lived with it, but I carried with me, knowing that my best friend, who I loved like a brother, talked every day for 20 years, likely had his last thoughts were dislike, hatred, or anger towards me. That's been, again, one of those consequences you can't foresee, you can't factor into any risk-reward analysis to do something illegal or improper. It's something you can't expect. So why am I speaking to you today? It's not because it's a condition of my parole or probation. My sentence is completely finished. In the vernacular of people in prison, my warrant has expired and I'm on road. I'm just doing this because I want to. I feel compelled to do it for reasons you'll hear about. It's not for personal enrichment, as I don't donate my fight fees to a charity. The charity is Restorative Justice Housing. It's a charity I was involved in starting up a few years ago in Toronto, and with myself and other people who've gone through the prison system, also chaplains and lawyers and police detectives, because we realize there's a need for long-term offenders when they get out. There's a penchant to be very, very much homeless because you have the stigma of your criminal record. It's hard to get a place to rent. If you're away a long time, you don't have family access, and you might have the finances. So what we do is we rent houses in the private marketplace to landlords who know about who we are and who we're going to put in their homes. And then we sublet rooms within these houses to long-term ex-offenders, almost always elderly, always committed to reform, who can't find a safe place to live otherwise. And we just charge them whatever they can pay, whether it's a government subsidy that they get or a small percentage of their part-time, full-time job, but always below market rates. The very first person I put into a home was an elderly lifer. He'd done over 4 years in prison. Never killed anyone. It was the first lifer I ever met. He was a lifer doing that much time for something other than murder. He actually escaped early on in his prison sentence, and he ended up getting a life sentence for that. And when I brought him to a room, it was a very modest room, small room, in a very modest house in a lower end part of Toronto. It was the only place we could find a landlord who would let us rent the house. He started crying, and he said, "This is where I want to die," because we had taken him from a rooming house, a really rough rooming house. He was getting beat up and assaulted every week and having his prescription drugs stolen from him. And now I gave him a safe place to live. He was so grateful. He was for tears of joy. And I knew at that point I was on the right path. Wherever that path leads me, that's what I want to do going forward. Also, I'm not act as a cautionary tale for professionals, though it will. You know, I just don't think anyone can envision themselves doing what I did, but maybe you might see yourself in some sort of ethical situation in the future that can be analogous to it, or cause you to think maybe there are consequences that I've not factored in, and that's why I'm mentioning you in that sense. And it's not to share anecdotes from prison about market and commodities. I actually have 3, and they're all different shades of inappropriate, but I'll do one for Will's sake. So I found myself in a medium prison in Ontario called Fenbrook, and at that prison, the warden was encouraging the inmates to get on the methadone program. And methadone is a prescription drug you take if you're addicted to heroin or other drugs, and it's used in prisons to slowly taper people off their addictions, because you can adjust it and lower it bi-weekly until the person's completely off methadone and, in theory, completely off their drug addiction. So about 7 o'clock in the morning, when everyone's still in bed, the methadone users, they would get up early and they would line up to get their methadone. And what would be administered would be mixed in with applesauce. So the inmate would take the applesauce with methadone in it, and then he would have to turn to 2 guards on either side to show that their mouth is empty and there's nothing on their tongue, that they swallowed it. So that's the background. So one morning I wake up and my cellmate in there, Steve, he's a long-term offender, he's in there, and another guy comes in that I knew was in the methadone program, but I didn't know who he was. And Steve hands him 4 chocolate bars. And as soon as the guy takes the chocolate bars, puts in his pocket, Steve puts his hands like this, and the person vomits in Steve's hands, and then Steve eats this methadone-laced vomit applesauce to ingest the methadone to get a higher dose. And I knew right then and there, number one, I never want to be addicted to drugs, because certainly in prison, because it causes you to do things like that. And secondly, applicable to you, that if you can find a buyer and seller, there's a market for everything. So that's what I saw. You can buy a bond maker, you can buy anything. You can find anything. So I tried to bring it up once in a while. So bring it up. Why am I speaking today? It's to show the importance of professional ethics, the unforeseeable consequences for you, a breach, and that's really my focus, is unforeseeable consequences, and what can be done to better protect information by detailing how my co-accused and I, as Will mentioned, we did over 100 separate deals. That's not 100 separate trades, buy, sell, buy, sell. There were thousands of those. I mean, individual deals, there were at least 120. Don't remember how many because it wasn't keeping a record of at a certain point, but there's a lot of deals. So how did we get so much information from so many different people? And you maybe can see holes in your own system or things that are being done that you might apply to yourself and say, well, maybe need to seal that up. And finally, for me, it's to solve, based on what I say, to solve a mystery for me that I've been carrying with me since a time in prison, and then to answer any questions you have. So the rules governing insider trading, I'm sure you will mention, you had a lecture on it. It varies by jurisdiction. In the US, it's largely judge-made law, although they are passing legislation that hasn't been finalized yet, called the Insider Trading Prohibition Act. And statute-based in Canada and the EU. I was actually the first person, as mentioned in the film, convicted under the criminal code change for insider trading. The essence of it, though, is buying or selling of security using information that is A, material, expected to affect the stock price or the price of the security, and non-public, not commonly known. So maybe only a few people have this information, and you come across it somehow, and then use it for personal gain. That's the essence of insider trading, really anywhere in the world. Next one. Now, how do I acquire information, the inside information, through professionals like yourselves and firms and other people? And it was directly and indirectly and on a spectrum from closely connected to distant and unconnected. The first level is my co-accused working directly on a transaction. This is, I would argue, is the weakest link in the system, whatever protocols you put in place. Because if someone is on the deal, working on something, controlling the information flow, that individual, if they go straight, it really can't stop them. If they decide to do something improper, you can't stop them. You might be able to catch them later on, but you can't stop them from doing it. So that's why when I do my talks, I say, everyone does dry ethics lectures, they check the boxes, yes, 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 yes. But once you emphasize the real consequences of not doing yes, 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 doing something improper, illegal, or unethical, and then you hear about the consequences of that, that makes the lesson, I think, a little more entrenched in your mind. At least that's what I hope, and that's why I do these talks wherever anyone asks. The next level beyond that is spelunking through offices. Spelunking means cave diving. So what my co-accused at that time, Gil, was working in New York, and we realized he could never really work late enough in New York to be the last guy in the office. His firm had 600 or 700 lawyers, very big firm. And you could say at 11 o'clock for someone there, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, someone there. So we looked at the schedules and we found that the time of 3:30 was the time when very likely no one else was there. So my job was to wake him up in time so he could get to the office at 3:30, and then he would go from office to office, spelunking, looking for information. So in garbage cans, on top of desks, in the photocopy room, in the shredder room, finding things. And one little anecdote we had, he would always carry a book with him. And we did that because, let's say someone confronted him in office, like, what are you doing in my office? He would say, oh, I'm looking for this book. And for whatever reason, we changed the book every week. So we called that, I don't know why, because at that point, if someone sees you carrying the same book over and over again, you're already caught. But we changed the book, so we call that tradecraft. We did to avoid things in our minds to not get caught. That was one of the things we did. The level beyond that is nighttime staff's anonymous password. Now, he was working at a big international firm, and we discovered that if someone accessed, let's say, a file that you weren't working on, another lawyer's file through the computer system, that file would say, Joe Blow or me or more likely my co-accused had looked at that document. And if that person had no right to look at this document, no reason to look at this document, the lawyer seeing that or the professional seeing that would say, hey, why is this guy in Toronto or in Seattle or New York looking at my document here? And that would raise a lot of red flags. But we discovered that firm made the mistake of giving the nighttime staff who would come in to work and type up documents and such, they gave them all the same password, and the same password applied around the world. So we started accessing that password and then use that to access documents so that it could show someone looking at a file saying, anonymous nighttime assistant looked at your document, et cetera. And so they would probably assume it was just a valid purpose. Maybe someone in an office needed a precedent or wanted to find out something. So for that reason, it gave us a huge pool of information, and simply because the passwords were always the same and not attributed to an individual. That's what I would say. All passwords should be attributed to an individual, but they were attributed. certainly at least to the entire office, but initially it was the entire world, same nighttime password for staff coming in. The next level is conflict searches for too detailed. So when you hire a professional, oftentimes you want to see if they can represent you, whether it's a securities lawyer or something else, and you ask them to do a conflict search. So what would happen is my co-accused would get calls. He was a Canadian working at an American firm in Toronto, so a very unique position. So a lot of the Canadian law firms would call him wanting to hire him on the other side of the deal to provide the U.S. aspect of the deal. So they would call him and tell him, hey, can you represent us on this deal? And because we were looking for inside information, he would start crying for more information that was necessary. And if the caller had given enough information that he was confident we could trade on that information, was enough to say, we know no company A is going to buy company B at whatever price, he would tell the person, oh, I'm sorry, I can't represent you, we have a conflict. Even if there was no conflict, he would say, we have a conflict. And that person would go away, hire another firm, and then he would feed me the information and I would trade on it. So that anyone looking back later on in the future could see absolutely no connection to me, who's doing the trading, and the source of information was someone who called him from another firm, another place, for the conflict search. So that was one aspect. And all these things are, I think, why we were able to collect information and avoid detection for so long. The next level is a conversation with innocent professionals and ego. So I don't know if you know, lawyers always think they're smarter than their clients. You probably deal with them. Oh, sorry, you are lawyers. Sorry, I apologize. I did not know that. I forgot. So when two lawyers in downtown Toronto, at least they meet, we realized it's always an ego play. So Gil had trained himself, so he would lead the conversation to say what deal he was working on. So he'd say, I'm working on this big deal. And the other person, they might say, oh, that's fine. But many of them would say, oh, really, I'm working on this bigger deal. And they would say the deal, and he would pry for information, get enough, and then he would walk away. And we had now inside information that he would feed to me, and again, we'd buy the transaction. And again, there's really no paper connection between the source of information, this innocent professional who just had an ego want to say he's doing bigger deals than Gil, and me buying the stock somewhere else in the world. Finally, it's careless comments and documents revealed by lawyers, investment bankers, CEOs. So we had an arrangement that if I had nothing to do, back then there was really one Starbucks where all the investment bankers and all the lawyers, the corporate lawyers would go downtown Toronto. So if I had nothing to do, I would just sit there all day and I would look around, I would overhear conversations, because I knew what to look for, I knew what documents to look for, and then I knew some certain individuals who might say something inappropriate or they shouldn't say, and I would just sit there. So we must have had, I would say, at least 10% of all our deals were just me overhearing professionals in public. In one case, a CEO of a gold mining company, they were being bought out, and he was extremely detailed, bragging about the gold mining company that was buying his company, and if I said the name, you would recognize it. And everything he said in that coffee shop was exactly what we did, and we made a bit of money on that transaction. And again, there's no connection to me and the source of information. It's just someone I'm overhearing, a professional out in public who's just too careless with their documents. Because again, nine times out of 1,000, you can show documents, no one's going to care. But you might come across someone like me who knows what to look for, knows what to hear, and I would exploit that, and I did many times. And you'll see that the impact it had on people who were careless later on in this presentation. So how do we avoid detection by authorities as long as we did? Now, when I started doing these presentations, these talks, one of my first groups was a group of regulators. So I said, well, I'm going to give them some value added, something that they don't know, because I did this for 15 years, and but for certain mistakes at the end, some would argue some were intentional, I would not have been identified. So I said, I'll give them what we do so they can help their system out. So after the talk, one of the regulators came to me, she said, she said, thank you for the talk, I really seem very earnest, you're trying to make things better for people, but it'd be for your own good to take out that slide from your presentation. Now, I had done a lot of time in prison, so it sounded to me like a threat, like for your own good, take that out. And she sensed that I had taken that the wrong way. She said, no, I know what your motivation for doing this, and I don't want you to give a slide like that, and someone in the audience somewhere now says, oh, now I know I have the blueprint, I can do it too. And that person might not be as careful as you, might not understand what they're doing as well as you, and they might get caught. And they might get a criminal sentence, and they might have something happen akin to your co-accused or to you. And if that happened, let's say someone committed suicide in response, it would completely devastate you and probably encourage you to stop doing these talks. And I thought about what she said, and she was right. So I take that out now, not because I think anyone in this room has the same ethics and morality I had back in the day. Today, I don't think anyone does today. But there might be a moment in your future where you have professional pressures, financial pressures, personal pressures, isolation pressures, and it might cause your line of ethics and morality you have that's kept you on the straight and narrow to this point to bend a little bit. And my goal with my talks is when that happens, you feel that, I want you to pause so that your natural ethics and morality manifest themselves again, and you think about the consequences, because I always stress that no matter how brilliant you are in mathematics, you really can't do an accurate risk-reward assessment because you can't not know the risk. Certainly everything happened to me, I never factored it in. Had I known when I started, if someone said, all right, you're gonna have this lots of money, lifestyle, everything else, but it's gonna cost you your son and your best friend, who you love like a brother, is going to commit suicide and hate you the moment he dies. I certainly would never have done it for any amount of money in the world, but that's exactly what ended up happening, and I never foresaw that until the end when it actually did happen. So that's my lesson. So if you want an example of unforeseeable consequences that can happen to anybody, this is my first range in a maximum security prison. This is Millhaven in Ontario. This is what I saw when I was brought to the range. A range is a collection of cells. In this prison, there's about 15 cells on one side, 15 cells on the other side. There's steel metal doors. There's a little window in them about the size of a large piece of toast. There's 2 guys per cell. And so the guards brought me and another inmate to the front of the cage. They told us to stare straight ahead. And then the guards backed up, and then the cage behind me, the identical to this, closed shut. And once it closed, this one slid open. And then the voice in the intercom above us from the guard bubble back behind us said, start walking straight ahead. So we start slowly shuffling ahead. You can see guys are looking through the window. Some people are shouting things to scare you or just to shout things to make it interesting for themselves. So as I'm walking farther up the head, the range, 2 cells on the opposite sides of the hallway, they slide open automatically. And the voice above again says, Kermosic, turn left. And the voice says to the guy whose name I don't remember, says, you turn right. So we dutifully do that. So I turn left into my cell. The door shuts. My cellmate, by the name of Clark, who's in for manslaughter, he jumps up. As soon as the door locks, says, you are so lucky you turned in with me and didn't go across the hall with Smart. Because that guy who came in with him, he's getting torn up tonight. Now, through questioning, I thought I knew what that meant, but through questioning, I learned that the inmate Smart, who's a lifer, and that's a big dude, scary guy, who had killed 2 brothers, chopped off their heads, hands and feet. What he did, he knew he was never getting out. So to make prison interesting for him, he would sexually assault and brutalize his inmates when he got a new inmate in there. And that would continue as long as it was interesting for him, or if it was discovered, if something happened, his security would be upgraded. He would move to the special handling unit, the shoe unit, and it just because different stresses up there, it made it interesting for him. And he would work his way down after a year and a half, and do this whole thing again. And everyone in this range knew this. I don't know if the guards knew it, but all the inmates do it. And so I went to sleep that night knowing that I'm in my cell and the guy across the hall, he's going to be brutalized that night. So the next morning, the way Millhaven did breakfast, it was almost Pavlovian, so that the guards would send electrical shock to the door and they'd all shake and shake. And that would give you the clue that, hey, you have to get up out of bed, put on your shoes because the door is going to open and there's no delay. So when the door opens, you're going to have to walk out, you turn, you walk down the hall like army ants, you get your tray and you move back and you come back inside the same way. You only have a very limited time, so you can't, if you take too long, you'll get locked out or you won't get breakfast. So the next morning, the door shakes, so I get up, I quickly put my shoes on, I stand at the door waiting for it to open, and it slides open, and across the hall, I see the guy I came in with, the inmate I came in with. And on his face, I could draw a picture to this day, right now I can draw a picture. He had every negative human emotion you could imagine on his face. Sorrow, pain, confusion, distress, panic, everything you could see on his face. So the night I expected he did have, and how horrible his night was, his day did not get any better. Because later in the day, we had shower time. In this range, there was 2 showers and 2 phones, so they would release 5 guys at a time. The 2 showers were just 2 cells, and it turned into showers. So the door would open, and there was no privacy. You go into your shower. And so this guy, who I came in with, when shower time came, he went to one of the showers. He took his Vic razor to shave. He stepped on it, crushed it, took the blade out, and slashed his neck and his arms. And I know this. Either he fell out intentionally into the range or from loss of blood. He flopped out of the shower into the range. There's blood and water everywhere. People are screaming, as you can imagine. And the guards come, take him away, and never see him again. I don't know if he lived or died. And I tell that story because I was no stronger than him. My will was not greater than him. I'm not tougher than him by far. So whatever happened to him, it would have happened, or some variation would have happened to me. I would have suffered the exact same fate. And I'm only here because I was told to turn left instead of right. So when I do these stories, I say, the odds of something like happen to him or to me, to you, if you go off the proper path, it might be 1,000,000 to 1, it might be 10,000 to 1, it might be 2 to 1. And your left might be my right, and the fate that he had might be the fate you had, or something similar, or something completely unforeseeable. And that's why I do the talks. I emphasize the personal consequences. You really can't know. I certainly never knew how close I was to sharing his fate when I got there. I thought I would do my time, get out, but the parts of it were quite horrifying. And that was one of the stories. And oftentimes I can see that person's face because I'll go to the washroom, I'll turn on the lights, and I look at the mirror and I see his face rather than mine at times. That's something you carry with you and you couldn't foresee. Now, how I was finally collared or caught after 15 years, it was not by the compliance department checks. Oftentimes, maybe every year or so, I would get a brokerage firm. I had many brokerage accounts all around the world. So I think we had maybe 30 or 40 near the end by the whole period of time. So compliance department said they want to talk to me about a deal that I just purchased. So obviously, I purchased a stock and made some money inside trading. They wanted to talk to me about it. And whatever I said was obviously plausible enough that nothing ever came from these investigations. They were probably just ticking the box. They would say, why did you buy company A? And I would have a plausible explanation because I would research it ahead of time, say, why would I buy it other than inside information? And they just checked it off and they just let me go. So that layer was not sufficient, I would argue. And secondly, it's not by brokers. You would think the brokers, they would know. The brokers I interact with all the time with orders online or in person, they had the best relationship with me. None of them turned me in, not a single one. And I know for a fact, at least 3 I would bet money, knew for certain I was inside trading. I caught many of them front running my orders. I put in a big order, let's say $2 or $3 million order, and I can see, watching the level 2, I can see where someone's putting an order right ahead of my big order, and I view that as a broker. Many were piggybacking, so they'd see my success and they would buy the same stock afterwards. And I had one broker bribe me, so I knew he had one client who was on Canada's billionaire list. And obviously he was probably feeding my information to his client rather than identifying me to regulators. And at one point we met, and I never wear a tie, so he said, "Here's a gift of ties. Take it home and open it when you get home." So I get home, and there's $50,000 cash in this. So he was rewarding me for being his client because he's making way more money for somebody or for himself from me. And that broker, I never left him because I go, well, this guy's better than other brokers. He's putting my orders and giving me cash, which I could use. And he was my broker to the end. So he obviously knew. It's not typical to give your clients cash back, certainly not that much. That's one person. So that's not how I was identified. How I was, it was my fault. Indifference to precautions. I took precautions in the beginning because I wanted to keep inside trading for whatever reason. It was initially, I'd say to people, it wasn't financial, and it really wasn't. There was a compulsion on my part after a while that I enjoyed the puzzle. Like we only get maybe partial parts of information, something, and my job was to turn that information, however much it was, into actionable, something I could do actionable. I can buy a stock based on it. So there's a lot of research which I enjoyed, and then when the deal happened, it was almost like a slot machine. You buy your stock, and you wait, and then Monday morning would happen, it would be announced, and then you see how much money you made. Almost like a slot machine, how much money you paid, and then you move on to the next deal. So that's why I did it. But at a certain point, I wasn't enjoying it at all. So the precautions I told my co-accused I was doing, like I'm changing brokerage accounts all the time, I'm doing this and that, I'm using intermediary professionals like lawyers or accountants to place orders for me. I didn't because I didn't want to be bothered, I didn't like it. Part of me, being candid again, wanted to get caught, and that, if you look back, it's true because initially, to get away with it for 15 years, I took a lot of precautions that you think just for regulars had some level of confidence they would have identified me, but I was avoiding it for all these years until the end where I stopped doing these precautions and then they caught me. Another way I was caught, family name accounts. So as I mentioned, I wasn't enjoying the money. I was making lots of money and I wasn't enjoying it. So what I did after a time, I said to family and friends, I said, let me manage your account. You give me your password and I'll buy you stocks. I'm doing really well. And some of them did, and I would do it. So if I made, let's say, $500,000, didn't affect me whatsoever. But if I made, say, $10,000 for a cousin or a neighbor or something, they were genuinely happy. And I lived vicariously through their happiness because I was doing something illegal. That's something I tell people that, there's different kinds of money. So when you're doing money, you're getting money, you're doing something illegal, you don't enjoy it because you know you didn't really earn it. And it doesn't give you, it sort of eats at you in a way. So I said, I'll live through my friends and family and do it through them. And so maybe it's much less money. But the problem is, of course, now you have more people inside trading on the same information and it's more likely to get caught, which eventually we were for that reason. And finally, the big mistake was the feed it in slowly. So had this happened early when I started trading, I never would have done this mistake. So I was going to do about a $2 million stock purchase. The stock was about $20 a share, so 100,000 shares. And I called the broker, and he was not there. So I said, okay, I'll talk to the assistant. And the assistant broker was not there to pick the order. And normally I would just say, okay, I'll call back later. I'll do it later. But I said, okay, who else is available? So there's like a next level assistant. So I get her on the line, and I said, all right, I want to buy $2 million worth of this stock, but it's relatively thin. It only trades maybe 20, 30,000 shares a day. So I can't. So please feed it in slowly. It's like between over the next 2 weeks. I think it's 2 weeks. So if there's some shares offered, a few thousand here, a few thousand there, grab them to slowly build my position to 100,000 shares or whatnot, what I want. And I said, you understand? She said, yes, I understand. I said, great. So I hang up the phone, I turn on my computer, I'm watching all the trading going on, and all of a sudden I see this stock shoot up $2, 100,000 shares were put in a market order, which means you're just going to buy whatever the price is you're just buying it. So it scoops it up, and I saw that, and I knew I am dead. I remember saying, I am dead. And at that point, whatever red flags there are in the system, that triggered it. And a few weeks later, my co-accused came to my house. He received an email from his partners in New York. They were flying down to talk to him. And an email had all these deals that I knew we had traded, because they wanted to talk to me about these deals. This last deal was one of them. And he came to my house and he said, I thought about it all weekend, and here's the plan. I said, great, tell me what the plan is. I think we're going to get arrested. He says, you commit suicide, and I'll take care of your kids, and in return, I'll say to the regulators and everyone else investigating that you were the one just took the information on your own. You were like, because we're best friends, see each other every day. You would my house, you would access my computer, get it that way. You go to my office, you get it that way. You overhear things from me, get it that way. I said, that's a pretty good plan, but I actually don't want to commit suicide. He said, oh, well, this is the only out for you. I said, okay. So I, of course, instead of committing suicide, I hired a lawyer that day. And 2 days later, my co-accused came to my house again, middle of the night, and not banging on my door, and he knew I hadn't committed suicide. And I knew he had snapped, he'd gone desperate. When he's telling me to kill myself, I thought he was coming to kill me. So I said, Gil, put your hands on my window, my door, so I can see you don't have it in your hands. And then I said, do it. He said, they are on the window. I can't see his hands, right? So I opened the door, and he's wearing leather gloves to not have fingerprints. And it's not, the temperature is quite warm at this time. So I knew, so I grabbed a kitchen knife. So I have a knife. I said, Gil, turn around. I think you have a knife behind you. You snap, you want to kill me. He goes, oh. So we're arguing back and forth. He won't turn around. And I shoot him out. And I said, look, we can find some story to get out of here. And the line that I used, which I mentioned to Will earlier, is like two lawyers in a knife fight. And I said, but our interests are adverse, which is a line you would never hear in a knife fight ever in the history of the world. But between two lawyers, it might be. So eventually I shoot him out, and he said he would commit suicide instead. I said, no, you're not going to do that. We'll get through this. I honestly, we could get through it. I knew I was going to prison. I said, we get through it and rebuild our lives through afterwards. He never accepted that. I think the psychological issues were too great for him. So I think later that day, he took a bunch of pills, and his wife called me and said, like, what's going on? Why is Bill trying to commit suicide? I explained it to her, and she was actually my best friend before him. So I introduced him actually in Toronto. So I knew her before him. I knew him and her separately, but I introduced them together. Very good friends. And that was my last call to her. And the last time I saw him, I was pushing him out of my house with a knife. So two best friends, when this all blew up, were gone from my life forever. And again, that's one of those consequences you can't foresee. People were a huge part of my life, and they were gone because of what we did. Now, fortunately, because I cooperated right away, I did save a bunch of careers. So when the regulators came to me in the first week after, they had this list of names of professionals throughout North America, investment banker, accountants, lawyers, etc. And they said, how are these people involved in your scheme, your inside trading scheme? I looked at the names. I had never seen any of these names, never recognized a single one. And I thought about it, and I said, well, I don't think these people are knowingly involved in us. And I explained how, they may have been people Gil met on the streets, they might have been other professionals in conflict searches or not. But for me cooperating right away, because my co-accused did not cooperate for a year, he was fighting for a year. But for that, these careers were saved, because I know some of those people on the list, they were suspended, and if it dragged on long enough, I'm sure they would have been fired, because the taint of being associated with my case were so great. And one lawyer on the list he'd been involved in, they said 13 separate deals. It's hard to explain that innocently, that you're involved in this huge inside trade scheme innocently 13 times. But I explained it all, and as far as I know, all the careers were saved, and I'm sure they didn't help, but I felt good about doing that, and I think that put me on a path of trying to help other people, even at personal sacrifice. Because I'm sure I could have used the time to drag out, get a lower sentence, but I remember saying to my lawyer, I go, look, I'm prepared to go to prison, and I don't want innocent people to suffer. I don't want family and friends whose accounts I would trade for to be punished. So I did a deal where I accepted a criminal sentence in return for them only having to pay back a small amount of the profits that they made. So that was something I did. So it's a thought I carry forward. I don't want people to suffer from my mistakes. So when I do these talks to professional groups, I say, look, I'm not making money off this, but I'd like your help with one thing. It's a mystery that I've kept with me since my time. This is Kingston Penitentiary. This is actually my range. It's called the TD unit, the Transfer and Detention Unit. So I was there. This is Kingston Penitentiary, if you know, is a very famous maximum security prison in Canada. You had all the serial killers, Paul Bernardo, Clifford Olson, Colonel Russell Williams. Every serial killer was there at that time when I was there. So I walked, and this is the last year of its operation. So they are putting $0 into maintenance. The lights are broken, the windows on the side. It was February. Many of them are broken from previous riots or whatnot. And so there's snow blowing in. It's freezing cold. We had a washer and dryer to do your laundry on this range. The washer was broken, so you had to wash your clothes with a bar of soap in your sink. The dryer did work, but because it was so cold at night, the last guy out, his job was to pull off the vent and put it on the floor, and then run the dryer so it would blow hot air into the range. The guys in this range, I would say at least a quarter of them had ready for murder or something similar to that. Really, really rough range. So I'm there for about 2 weeks, and the guards come to me and they say, hey, do you want to do the job of cleaner? Because no one else on this tough range wants to do the job of cleaner. Now, a cleaner is, as the name implies, the guy who sweeps the floors and hands out the food trays and does the small cleans the showers. And you do that because in this prison, you would be locked up 23 hours and 40 minutes a day, save for yard time of an hour that may or may not come, and it does usually every second day. And I want to be out, and the cleaner gets out for 8 hours. And I want to be out because I want to call my kids. Because otherwise, I would never know my cell would be open, that I had access to the phone, and they might be at school when I had that chance, or it's too late, or it's too early in the morning. So that, being the cleaner allowed me to use the phone. That's the only reason I did the job. But the negative of that was I had to interact with all the guys in the range. So I'd hand out food trays, I'd walk by the cleaners, clean in front of them. So the guys knew that very quickly that I didn't belong. Whatever that means, they knew I was not, hardcore con in that area. So they started riding me. They'd mock me, push me a little bit. And I decided when I got into prison, I would never let people take advantage of me, because in prison, that sort of reputation follows you. Because guys will know everyone. If you don't have time, you know everyone, someone in some prison somewhere, and a reputation as being a mark, someone can be exploited, will follow you. So I would always push back. So they'd say something insulting to me, I would push back, sort of in a good, jovial way, but enough to know that I'm not going to take abuse from you, and I have your food, so it's something I might not give you your food. I'd walk past guys, I wouldn't give their coffee. They were too disrespectful, so I said, you're not getting your coffee. And just to set the tone. Now, of course, they threatened me, and they could have done something, but I had to set the tone that it would not be abused. So one particular inmate in cell number 5, his name was Frankie. He was a young guy. Everyone knew him, so he must have done a lot of time since he was 18 in the federal system. And he's a little bigger than me, tough guy. And Frankie, he did what everyone else did, but he crossed the line. He implied that I was a pedophile. So that's why I'm there. I don't fit in, I'm a pedophile, which is a dangerous moniker to have in prison. So I pushed back on him, and I wish I remember what I said, but I crossed whatever line there was in this prison. And as soon as I said it, and people that heard it knew I crossed the line back, Frankie, loud enough for all the 30 guys to hear, screamed, when my cell gets cracked open, I'm going to come over yours and I'm going to effing, he didn't say effing, I'm going to effing kill you. So, and because of who he was and where we were, everyone knew he was obligated to at least try to kill me at that point in time. So I remember, obviously being in a state of shock, because I knew that was a real threat. From a killer to saying to kill you, in that context, it's a real threat. And I remember hearing people started betting on this fight to me. So I was a 3 bag of chip to 1 underdog. So I remember, I knew I was an underdog in that fight. So I go back to my cell. It's the only one that's unlocked. I go in, I shut the light, and I know nothing good's going to come of it. Either I'm going to somehow win this fight, which is super unlikely, or I'm going to be maimed in some way. And in this prison, a common threat was pulling someone's eye out with your comb. It was a common threat. So maybe I'm just be maimed, or I'm going to be killed. So nothing good's going to come of it. So I wasn't a religious person at the time at all. So I shut the light and I started praying. And I guess being a stock trader that I was, I started negotiating with God. So at one point, I said loud enough, either I said out loud or in my head loud enough, I said, God, you help me get through this, and I promise I will take some good from my bad experiences to help others. And as soon as I said that, again, I don't know if it was out loud or whispered or whatnot, I heard an explosion of metal that I'd never heard before in this range. Boom, and then another explosion of metal from the other part of the range. Boom, and then people were stomping towards me to my cell. So I go, this is Frankie coming with some guys to finish me off. I don't know what's going on. So I get ready, and all of a sudden a hand reaches out, grabs my cage door, and pulls it shut with a lock. It clanks shut. Once I catch my breath, I see a bunch of guards run past me, 2, 3, 4 correctional officers run past my cell door down the hall. So I catch my breath, I push my face against the bars, and I can see a couple of correctional officers come into view with a stretcher, and a few moments later they come back into view. And on that stretcher, having an epileptic seizure, is Frankie, the guy that was going to kill me shortly when shower time happened for him. He was in the top for the first 5 cells. He was going to be out in the next 4 or 5 minutes. He's having a seizure. They take him away. I never see him again. Now, depending on your view of the world, that was either an incredible coincidence, the timing, what I said, and what happened in the context, or divine intervention of some sort. I don't know. I will probably never know. But what I do know for certain, with complete certainty, is it happened immediately after I made a promise, maybe ineloquently with God, to take some good from my bad experiences to help others. And for having me speak here today and helping me keep that promise, I really do sincerely thank you very much. Thank you.
Wow, thank you. Thank you, Joseph. That's very powerful and very compelling. So I thought we'd do a little Q&A right now and then open it up to the room and those online if you have any questions. So why don't we start kind of at the beginning? How did you're a graduate of law school, articling at a firm, how did you get started?
Well, there was never a master plan. No one goes to law school 3 years and finish in the top whatever percent of the class to work at this big corporate firm to do inside trading. So I was on I think the first day of orientation of this big firm, myself, about 20 other articling students are there, and we're waiting for our tour to start. And I see a summer student comes over to a person I'm standing with, starts talking to her, and this summer student is wearing white leather driving shoes. It's discussed in the film, and I noticed they were driving shoes because I followed Formula One racing, and I saw that these were sort of the inappropriate footwear for an office. And I said to the guy, I said, why are you wearing these driving shoes? And he said, well, I'm wearing these so I can drive the car that's being delivered in the next half an hour downstairs with money I bought on a deal I worked on. Now, in a law firm, you weren't paid by the deal, you were paid bi-weekly at that time. So I took that to mean he had made money, certainly enough money to get a car delivered, maybe $50,000, maybe $100,000, delivered to the office. And I told my best friend, Gil, who was working at another firm, and I told him the story, and none of us remembers how it happened. We said, well, let's try that too. But we obviously did. And our first trade, we made $181. We had nothing. But within a few years, we're making millions of dollars in trades. We're so far into it. I'm addicted to the rush, the mystery that I want to keep doing it. My co-accused is addicted to the psychological benefit of having something over the people he works with. Like, he was at an American firm that luckily went to Harvard, big schools. And he thought they looked down on him, even though he was a very successful lawyer. So he said, well, you're so smart, you don't know I'm doing this illegal activity behind your back. And that's what he did. So we were so far into it. And then we said, well, we're so big, we started having to take precautions. And it sort of snowballed. So the slippery slope is real. It was almost like a joke. The first one, let's try it to see what happens. And then it became a job. It became a job for me to avoid detection and live this lifestyle.
And how long did you practice law after that?
About 2 years until one day I made, I think, $80,000 on a deal the day before, and I'm working on a Saturday, and my principal, senior partner, says, I need you to work more hours. And I said, it's a Saturday. I'm here on a Saturday. He goes, well, I need you to work more hours. And I said, okay. And then I walked out and I quit that day. So that's why I just walked away. I had the FU money enough at that point in time that I just walked out. So so I practiced a very short time. Even though I liked it, I loved law school and I liked working. Now I had to fallback. This became my career, doing something which I never envisioned happening.
And so you did 100 or so plus deals with Gil, and at some point you stopped doing it. You got out for a while. Yeah. And then what brought you back into it?
Oh, good question. At some point we initially said, well, we want to make $1 million, we'll stop. Okay, $1 million US. So we did that really quickly. And then we go, get it $3 million. We kept escalating the number. And at one point we said, okay, we have enough. I want to go so we split our money equally. I gave Gil actually a little bit more because I thought he was taking more of a sacrifice. And I bought a house in the country. He bought a house downtown Toronto. And both paid relatively the same amount. And I was done. I was living my life. I just got married, just had a baby, doing my thing. He's doing his thing in Toronto. And then, unfortunately, he was not the trader, because I was in charge of the trading, and he thought he could do what I was doing, and he lost all his money. He margined up, bought a lot of things on margin, and went to zero. So he came back to me and he said, 2 years later, and said, look, I lost all my money, I want to do this again. And my biggest regret, you watch these TED Talks with ethical speakers, they say, my regret is I wish I never started. No, maybe it's true, but I find it insincere. To me, my biggest regret is my friend came back to me and asked me to do it again. And instead of saying, no, I'm not going to do this again, it's not worth it, I have too much to lose, here's X millions of dollars to thank you, go about your business, you can rebuild your nest egg, do it on your own. I didn't. And that's my regret, not giving him some money to go away. And I said, okay, let's do it again, so you get a certain amount of money back. But the second time, I was very resentful by being put in this position, which I never enjoyed. So the precautions that we took in the beginning to avoid protection, I did not take. I didn't switch accounts, I did so many things I didn't do, but I told him I did. So that's when I mentioned that I'm sure he hated me at some point, certainly at the end, because I was lying to my best friend. It's discussed in the film. I'm lying to my best friend saying, oh yes, I'm doing this, this, and this, but I'm not. Because part of me wanted to stop, and without being straight to say, give me money, I think I wanted to stop by getting caught, just the way I was acting at the end. So that's how it started, and that's how it ended, really.
And you did over 100, it's 120, right? So it seems to me, do you think insider trading is much more common in Canada or the US than is sort of advertised out there?
Yeah, the line I always use is it's more common than regulators will admit and the public knows about. So at a certain point, I mentioned earlier that you get calls occasionally from compliance departments asking questions. So we had to find a plausible explanation to why I bought stock A, other than I had inside information. So because I'm immersed in the M&A activity, I'm studying it, I'm looking at things that are going on. We built a list, I think like 9 or 10 indicia of insider trading. So the most obvious one, let's say someone goes on a message board and discusses the entire deal, the terms of the deal. So that's one level. Another level might be, option trading that happens out of the blue, starts happening. And we had a list of this, which I don't want to give too many away, but we had a list. So that's what I knew. So of all the deals I did, only one deal did I not see any of these indicators that I attribute to insider trading. Only one. So it happens a lot. The fact that I'm the only person to go to federal prison in Canada for it, I think it's just a policy decision on the regulator's part in Canada. Because before me, people were being found not guilty. So once I pled guilty, that was under the new legislation. So now the record is 1-0. They don't want to risk going to court again and maybe lose it, go 1-1 or 1-2. So they just really almost extort fines from people in my position instead of prosecuting them criminally. Whereas in the US, they don't really care about the record. They prosecute everyone. So when I was negotiating the deal, I was in a room and there's a person in SEC in Washington on the other side and the Department of Justice on the other side. And the Department of Justice, I can hear him saying, if you don't cut a deal, I'm going to make sure you get 25 years because under the sentencing guideline, I can do 25 years. And I'm going to put you in whatever prison in New York or rough prison, and you're not going to see your family for 25 years. I'm going to fight extradition to do your time in Canada. So I remember saying to my lawyer, I go, we better cut a deal today, right? It was a real threat to me because I didn't know, that was something I couldn't figure out. So one of the reasons I think my co-accused committed suicide because when we flew to New York, we could be sentenced for 5 additional years in New York. It was always open, the judge could do that. And I think that stress was a lot for Gil. So then once he committed suicide, I arrived there. I was completely broken, distraught about what happened. And that the judge clearly took pity on me and just gave me time for nothing extra in the U.S. other than the 1 day of processing at Rikers Island. That was all I received in the U.S.
Wow. It was interesting to me that, you're both lawyers. It was like mostly the external law firms that were kind of the conduit for a lot of this information.
Yes.
And we hire a lot of external lawyers for various purposes. So I'm wondering what your perspective would be for a company like ours. What can we do to either plug the holes with our external lawyers or just plug the holes within our company that might exist?
Well, you might have certain standards. You might want to ask the firms you're hiring, what are their standards in this regard about access to information by people that you can't really name. So the anonymous password search, you have a system like that in your firm where anyone can access documents without knowing who did it. That's one level. And when you're hiring people, you might want to limit the information or have some disinformation in it so that someone you end up not hiring doesn't have enough information to take advantage of what you told them, the conflict search thing. Now again, 99 out of 100, not a risk, but there might be someone like me on the other end says, oh, I can do this, what we did. I was talking earlier, if you look at insider trading cases, so many factors repeat in different cases, different people, they do the same things I did 15 years ago. They do it again and again, switching names and disposable phones, all these sort of things happen because human nature is, I think, is consistent, so people will do the same thing. So it's something I would suggest you do if you're from learning from my experience.
And we were talking about this, and I mentioned this at our training. There's recently an SEC case. It was a pharmaceutical company. And what was interesting to me in that case is he didn't trade his own company's shares, but he knew his company was getting acquired, and he traded other companies' shares on the assumption that they're also going to go up when the news hits the wire. So,
and that is something we did. Our pool of capital was big enough that we weren't looking to make the most amount of money on a deal. We want to make money on a deal, but our goal was there's probably like a cross of make a lot of money but not get identified. So what we did, we called those cover trades. So if I knew company A was being taken over, I would never buy company A at all. I would buy options in company B and C in the same sector. So when company A went up 20% on the takeover, B and C, the sector might be revalued. They might go up 5 or 10%, but I had options on it, so I might make 20, 30, 40, 50% on that move. And any regulator looking at it or talking to me would say, well, clearly he doesn't have inside information, because if he did, he would buy company A, the obvious point. But because it wasn't a one-off situation for me, it was almost like a job, I would put aside more money just to make some money but not get identified. And that's the funny that someone else did the exact same thing they thought about. Maybe they read my case, I don't know, but because I revealed this to regulators. But it's funny that people, again, human nature, they do the same thing. So my example of what happened to me maybe not applies to anybody, but human nature, some variation of that might apply to you or anyone else here.
very interesting. So let's switch gears now. And typically white-collar criminals don't end up in maximum security prisons. So two maximum security prisons. And Kingston, the most notorious of them all.
Yes.
How did you end up there?
Okay, so back then in Canada, if you had a sentence more than 2 years, they would start you in an assessment prison. And in Ontario, that happened to be Millhaven. So you probably don't know many people who've gone to prison. It's rarer in Canada than the US. So more than 2 years, that's a serious offense in Canada. So they started me in Millhaven. And when you get there, in the assessment, you can spend 90 days there and you get assessed. So one of the first meetings, I was met by an administrator. I remember his name, Mr. Callins. And he asked me, he asked me for my offense. And I was being completely honest. I said, well, it was a victimless crime because no one had lost money. Everyone who I associated made money. Brokers made money, family made, friends made money. I made sure they kept their money with my deal. So I said it was, in a sense, a victimless crime. He became so indignant by that because he's dealing with other people who denying the crime. He wrote down, believes it's a victimless crime. I saw him write it on a piece of paper. That sentence haunted me. So from that day forward, everyone in my cellmate was a murder or a double murder or something serious. Everywhere I went. So whatever the roughest ride they could give me, just based on this, they put me. So that's why I did Millhaven. That's why I did Kingston, Penn. I did a medium prison. Terrible. You wouldn't think white collar first time in prison. You go the roughest road. And it's because I said, which I, at the time, truthfully, was a victimless crime. That's how I ended up in the way I was run over by the system.
What did you do to get ready? Mentally, physically, you know this is going to happen.
Yes.
How do you get ready for what's going to be it's going to be a rough ride?
I've never been asked that question. It's a good question. I tell you, always someone asks a question I don't think about it. So I started accessing things online, like prison stories, learning the vernacular. There's websites like Prison Terms, so that I would go in, for example, using the phone. If you've been to prison or jail, you don't just pick up the phone. So there's usually 3 or 4 phones, 2, 3, 4 phones in a range. And if the phone is hanging down, that means it's reserved for the toughest guys in the range. So whenever they want a phone, that phone is hanging down. So you see a phone off the hook here, you put it back. Oh, I'm being courteous, right? So I didn't know this rule. So I get to a jail in Toronto. When the phone is hanging down, I want to call my family, say I'm in jail, I'm fine, don't worry about me. So I go over there and I pick it up and I start talking. And all of a sudden, a guy comes over and he slaps me in the face as hard as he could. And Toronto jail is called a deaf face. So it makes you deaf beside the ear. And I didn't know. So this phone was reserved for him whenever he wanted it. So you had to learn how to use the phone in prison. So what you do is you have your shirt, you always put your shirt over the phone so your germs, your hand wouldn't touch the phone, and you talk through your shirt, and you see which phone is available. And sometimes a phone would be, so let's say it's hanging down, or it's not hanging down, but you'd have to put your prison card on top of it. So that was your order. Your card's on top of the phone. This person's next, this person's next. These are little things. So I studied what I could, but you really, until you're there, you don't know how it operates. So you learn very fast. And I had one inmate take me under his wing. He was being very helpful. He wanted $50 in his canteen, so I had a family send him $50 in his canteen so he could buy garbage, junk food inside. But he looked after me after that first day, and then he was very well respected. So they thought I knew him, so no one beat me up at that jail because they thought we're friends.
Gotcha. And then you transferred out into.
Then I transferred out to Millhaven after that. You have to start all over again. It's different, like jail and a prison setting, completely different.
If you were in charge of Canadian prisons, what would you change?
I would apply a market solution to it. So I would incentivize the most like wardens and guards. Some part of their salary has to be producing a product, connected to the product they produce for the public. I think you think if someone goes to jail, we want them rehabilitated so they don't go to jail again. They're not a burden for the taxpayer, not committing crimes on me and my family or whatnot. So some part of their salary, some bonus has to be tied to, let's say someone goes through the system, they're prison, and they don't commit another crime or they're not on social assistance within 5 years. Then you get a little bonus. Something like that. Because right now, there is no incentive. It's just, people just do their job. They don't care what I do when I get out. The line I always use is the system of justice in Canada exists to benefit those that administer it. They have a job, they're doing fine, but they're producing a product that no one in the public wants. It costs $250,000 a year, approximately, to keep someone in a maximum security prison. So they spent, $40 million in me through the system. But what was the value of that? It was no sense. And in prison, people think, oh, you got rehabilitation programs, you learn different things. And it's a lie. It's a complete lie. So I was in one prison, and I was there long enough. I was the shopper. So in that range, you get a list of groceries, and you mark them off on a piece of paper, and then one inmate, which is me, would go to the warehouse there and collect all the food from the range and bring it back and then distribute it. And I was given that job because I was pretty good with math, numbers, and guys in the range knew I wouldn't steal from them. It's a common concern. So one guy on my range, he had just graduated from high school, his high school diploma that day. He came back to the range very proud. He said, I shook the ward's hand. Here's my high school diploma. So I'm doing the food, and I said to him, he said, I want 2 bananas. I said, you don't have enough money for 2 bananas. You'll only get half that. And he said, how much is that? So he didn't know half of 2 was 1, and he just got his high school diploma. And it's very common, guys, who graduate from the system, they can't read. So I met so many people can't leave prison after 10, 15, 20 years, cannot read. And when you get out, you can't read, you can't get a job, you end up somehow going back to prison, and the cycle continues. And the people that administer it, they like that. They're benefiting. They got this pipeline of work. So that's not what the taxpayers want. I think the victims probably don't want that, but that's what's happening right now. So I would tie the pay of people in the system to producing a product that people want produced.
Interesting perspective, and it's an inside perspective on
Yes.
it, right? So none of us would have that experience in terms of seeing.
Not you yet, Will, but you looked kind of shady earlier.
So, okay, well, I won't ask this from a personal perspective.
You're thinking, what did he see me do earlier? Sorry about that. I have no inside information on Will. Outside this room, I don't know anything.
So you get out, your sentence is over. You were very successful, well-to-do. Now your money's kind of all gone. But how hard was it for you to integrate back into society after?
It's incredibly difficult because I mentioned earlier, people don't know someone's been to prison. So because you don't know, you don't have a family member or friend, it's easier for you to discriminate, let's say on housing, for example. In Ontario, where I'm from, you can discriminate, you can say, I'm not renting you because you have a criminal record. Just say it out loud. It's not one of the protected classes of the Human Rights Code. And that happened to me a lot. So I was actually only able to get a place to rent because I had thousands of Google searches, negative Google searches. So I applied for a place to live in an apartment. They search me up. They just say no to my face, or they'd say no after a little period of time. So I only was able to get an apartment because a friend of mine was in a law firm. They had a NFL football pool, and I entered it with $100, and I ended up winning it. I won $11,200 for the pool, and I used that. I paid that entire amount to rent an apartment. I paid it right up front, so the landlord wouldn't do a credit search of me or a Google search of me. They got the whole year's rent up front, and that's a story I tell because most guys in the prison, they can't do what I did. They end up not finding a place to live. There's shelters full of guys, ex-prisoners who may have money but nowhere else to live. And that's really one reason we started group restorative justice housing, because we saw this need. Because when you have a criminal record, no one wants to rent you. What do you do? And if you don't have a safe place to live, you are more likely to go back to a life of crime for many reasons. Just you might feel resentful towards society. You have no base to build yourself up. Maybe get a job, and that's why we do what we do with our charity.
When you got out of prison first, you had to go to a halfway house.
Yes.
And there was a bit of time before you were even able to kind of get out into the condo.
Yeah, at that time, so you do a 30% and you do a 6 of it in a halfway house setting. So it's big, is what it says. It's a house with 20, 30 guys in it. You the 3 or 4 guys in a room together, beds in a room, like a dormitory really. And you start there, and then eventually they kick you out. So the guys get kicked out of the halfway house with nowhere to go. They know I'm kicking this guy out of the halfway house, out of the federal system halfway house, and he's going to be homeless. He's going to live on the street. So some of those guys say, well, I don't want to live on the street. I will commit a crime, so at least I go to jail and I have 3 meals and a place that's not freezing cold in winter or wet or something like that. So it's a flawed system, and that's what we do. We just kick guys out eventually, And even if they're completely committed to reform, they have nowhere to live. They're on the street and they have no money or connection with family.
Well, I'm going to open it. I've been monopolizing time. I have lots of other questions, but I wanted to open up first here to the room, and then if you're on the WebEx, please put a question in the chat or the Q&A box. And Jillian, if you can let me know if there's any questions there.
We actually do have a question. You actually answered one of the questions that was initially, how did a white collar crime end up in maps? So thank you for answering that. The second one is, Tom would like to know if there were any brokers involved ever fined or investigated.
Yeah, the very last broker I mentioned gave me the $15,000 in a cash. He was eventually identified, and I believe he lost his license. They contacted me when I was on parole saying, would I testify against him? And I remember saying, do I have to? I mean, maybe subpoena. They go, no. I said, well, I'm not going to. I said, you have my information. I don't want to destroy this person's life. He thought he was helping me, so he eventually lost his license and everything else. But I did not cooperate at that point. I wasn't compelled to, and I didn't want to hurt him anymore. He was doing me a favor. He was giving me money, and he was, again, people see inside trading, it's a crime. It certainly is a crime, but it's one of those levels of crime where anyone can see themselves doing it. They go, why wouldn't you take advantage of information you have? Through some of those deals where I was at weddings and people knew I traded stock, and they would just tell me, oh, this stock, Sinar, which is a Canadian animation company, I remember one wedding, says, oh, it's being taken over next week at, say, $50 on a Tuesday, blah, blah, blah. And exactly what this person, a total stranger, told me at a wedding happened. Now, no one's going to brag about other crimes. I do a B&E robbery of this house down the road, come by, grab some jewelry. But this crime, people, they almost brag about doing it. It's very common. So I didn't want to ruin his life for something that I think most people in Canada don't think. I think maybe some high percentage of people in Canada could see themselves doing the crime that I did. And I didn't think he should be punished extra for that.
Did that never flag with the tax authorities?
I actually paid all some good questions. I never got that question. I actually enjoyed paying my taxes because I knew I was doing something illegal. I was making, I mean, 1 year near the end, almost $800,000 in taxes. I enjoyed paying taxes. So because I viewed it as turning something negative and illegal into something positive. Look, I'm paying, I'm a good taxpayer. So they always got their money.
Did the balance of your family know that you were doing something illegal, or was it just you and Gil?
It's just us. Maybe some people had suspicions, but no one did. My personality was, I'm trading stocks. That's plausible, making my trade stocks. And I was gambling. I was traveling around the world gambling. It fit my personality that I'm just a guy who trades stocks and lives a luxurious lifestyle. So if people suspected, no one addressed and say, hey, by the way, are you doing anything illegal? Because I would hire professionals like lawyers and accountants in the middle, be intermediaries between myself and others. And they should be sophisticated enough to know, but no one had said, hey, what are you doing? So maybe I covered it up well enough. I had plausible explanation, but no one really pressed me on that saying, well, I know you're doing something illegal. You got to stop. Never happened.
Could you suggest after 15 years you may have wanted to been caught or
Yes.
And you say a bit more about that? If I was doing this after 10 years and you think you're more clever than somebody, do you want people to know, or was it exhaustion?
Good question. I never thought about that aspect. You want me to almost say get caught, so you say, look how smart this guy was. He got away with 15 years. And the only way you're going to know that if I actually get caught. No, I think I just got tired of it because I wasn't enjoying the money. Anyone who knew me that time, I had lots of money, but I never acted like I enjoyed it. It was weighing down on me, my wife, and my family, because I'm living a lot. I'm doing something that no one knows about, and it's wearing me out. And I was resentful because we were out. We were completely clean. No one ever heard about us. But my friend lost all his money and sort of put me back into it. And I was angry at him for doing it again, making me feel these negative feelings. Because it's very stressful to live this lifestyle. Because you always think any moment you could get caught. And that's really something very difficult to live with. So I honestly believe, and subconsciously, because of the precautions I did take, that part of me wanted to get it just to stop. And I blame myself for not having the courage to tell my co-accused, saying, I want to stop, and here's the money, or I want to stop, get lost. But I didn't. I did something to get us to get caught, to be honest.
So go back to Will's question. If we take Gil's situation, so some of the very obviously anonymous password, and obviously not like the father on, but what are the less obvious ones that firm that he was working for could have maybe done that?
Well, one example, he liked to collect modern art. So he's working as a lawyer, and he has a multi-million-dollar modern art collection. So, and people in the firm would visit his house and they'd see it. And I guess we'd say that's why he was flashing with money. So he bought these art pieces that if you thought about it, say, how is this guy affording this, this house in Toronto, very expensive area, and have this modern art collection on his salary? Now, I don't know, maybe they asked him, I don't know, he might have a plausible explanation, I inherited or something. But that's one thing they could have done. As I say, the weakest link is the individual.
Because if someone who controls the deal flow wants to do something improper with it, feeds a third party, it's very hard to stop unless you make them not want to do it, which is, I think you can do that by focusing on consequences that you can't really do a cost-benefit analysis on.
So sorry, you initially started in jail and you went to the prison.
Yes.
And then off to Kingston, and it sounded like somewhere else. What's the benefit of the administration bouncing you around prisons? I mean, that has to be expensive, at least to some degree, to moving you.
So what happened was I did the Millhaven, did the whole thing, and I was out for 11 months. I had my own apartment, eventually the one I used with the football winnings to take. And I'm 11 months, and I switched parole officers. And this parole officer, she didn't understand insider trading at all. She met me, and 1 hour later, she revoked my parole. So I had, the cops come and arrest me, and they shipped me through, and they shipped me to Kingston Penn. They moved me all around the whole system, and I finally have a parole suspension hearing. And at that hearing, I'm, in a sense, fighting for my life. If I had lost that hearing, I would have to do 2 more years inside prison for a parole violation. And because I was a lawyer and well prepared, I argued that, because the parole officer had said, I said this Will earlier, she had lied, said, I told her I have a secret bank account that I'm going to access when I get out, my sentence over, and which I never said. So I fortunately, because I cooperated right from the start with the U.S. and Canadian regulators, they gave letters to the parole board saying, we believe he gave us all the money, because we're incentivized to say that's true because we get the money. If there's money out there that he can give us, we get it, and he gets a longer sentence. So, but for those letters, I probably would have lost that parole suspension hearing and did more time. So there was no benefit for anyone other than maybe overtime shipping me around. The parole hearing cost whatever $1,000, sending me back to another maximum period prison and moving all around. It cost a lot. There was no benefit for the taxpayers, I'd say, and might have been her vindictiveness to punish me somehow, or she just had it in her head that I'm going to teach. Maybe she saw the line about he thinks the victim is crime. It wouldn't surprise me that line again in my file. So well, I'll show you. I'll say he's got a secret bank account, and no one will believe this liar. And unfortunately, I was believed by the parole board, but most guys are not believed. So parole officer writes something down, and you have to weigh the credibility of an ex-con and a parole officer. You're going to lose almost every time. And I was very fortunate that I won and was released. And this parole officer was so spiteful. So once I won the hearing, she was required to do a community assessment of where I wanted to live. At that point, I'd lost my condo I was renting, so I said I wanted to live with my parents back in their home, and she refused to assess it. So before they release an ex-con to another location, the parole officer has to assess it and say it's a safe place, he's not going to commit crimes there. So she refused to do that. So now I'm stuck in a halfway house again until this assessment happened. I think 2 months or 3 months go by. I filed an appeal to the parole board, and the day before the hearing, where I would have won again, they released me. So they were just giving me a really hard time. So of my sentence, I did almost 30 months in one form of incarceration or another, which is a long time for a 3-year, 3-month sentence.
What was the timing of this? You might have mentioned that earlier.
It started in it was probably my first deal, maybe 1995 is when it started. Really, it's like 2000. 2010 was when I went to prison, so in that range, 95, 2010.
How much money did you make in total, and did you have to pay it all back?
Everything was seized. So at one point we lost track of how much money it was. Like there's so much money flowing back and forth. But at the end of the day, the deal we struck was because in the U.S. we would have to pay treble damages for something, whatever you make this way, it would be way more money than we had. So we did like a zero sum. So whatever money I had in any bank account was taken. So whatever it was, X millions of dollars, or 10 million US, whatever. So the deal we struck with the U.S. is a little twist. Because of sentencing guidelines, if it was more than $10 million, they couldn't give me a deal that was less than 5 years. So what was decided was they were going to pick 30 deals that added up to like $9.9 million. And they said they could prove these deals without my cooperation. So they picked those. I pled guilty to those. And they basically ignored the other 80 or 90 because they couldn't do a deal with me. It would be, under the guidelines in the U.S., I'd have to get like 20 years or 25 years. Even if I cooperate fully, I'd still have to do 20 years. And the regulators in Canada, the OSC, really wanted a conviction so they could put a feather in the cap, oh, we got this guy. And I think they pressured the U.S., who did them a favor to do that unusual limit of the number of deals to let me take a deal that was under 5 years.
And the U.S. component of it was just because you're dealing in U.S. stocks that are traded on U.S. exchanges.
And because my best friend is a lawyer at a U.S. firm, so that was the source of a lot of information. And we did a lot of trading. I lived in New York for a time, so I'm trading inside information living in New York with him. We're at a different firm. So I think that's the aspect of it.
Gotcha.
Can they come back again for those other ones? Or?
No, so I had a really good memory that time. So at one point, I met with the regulators. It's like a 3-day interviews. All these FBI and everyone's interviewing me on one side of the table and I'm on the side with my lawyer. And they're asking me questions. And then I'm giving all the information I have. At one point, the one person says, on August 5th at 7:11 a.m., you got a call from a payphone. And then at 7:14, you turned on your computer and you did this. And I said, you know what time I turned on my effing computer? Why are you asking me questions? So they knew a lot of information. Apparently, at one point, they had a wall full of binders of transcripts of phone calls. So they've been watching me for a while, recording all my cell phone calls. So this is what you hear now about the government I knew back then, 10 years ago, they had record records of all my phone calls. So the deal was, I gave full disclosure to the best of my knowledge, and they can't prosecute me for another deal. Although I'm always afraid to go to the U.S. I haven't been to the U.S. since, just in case some prosecutor says, oh, this one deal, whatever years ago you didn't mention, and they try to do something to me. So I'm very weird. So when I speak to U.S. groups, it's always by Zoom or WebEx or something, or Skype. Because I don't want, so when I said back then, I said, I didn't want Dog the Bounty Hunter to come grab me and take me across the border. I'm on a TV show, we got this inside trader here. So I was completely honest to the best of my ability. I'm trying to remember so many deals.
Did you ever short stock?
Yes, good question. Good question. So I knew one stock was a Silver Wheaton. They were going to do a financing where we knew the stock was going to drop after the bought deal. So brokers were going to buy, let's say, a third of the company and at a lower price than it was trading at. And we knew that, but we actually never ended up trading that deal because that deal was so obvious someone else was inside trading. My co-accused was working as a lawyer on that deal. And he'd say the deal is on and the stock would go down, or the deal's off right now, there's a delay and it would go up. It would track the flow of information so perfectly that we both avoided that deal because we said, well, this is clearly inside trading. The regulator's going to catch whoever's doing it and then grab us too. So we avoided it. And when I was interviewed by the regulators, I said, I gave this example of this story. I said, here's a case you need to look at because we didn't buy it because it was so obvious. And they go, oh, we don't care about that. We want to talk about you. So they never really, no one's ever prosecuted for that. But that was a clear case of inside trading where people were shorting to make money.
When you talk about it being victimless, maybe you don't still believe that, but is it the fact, or it's not zero sum, is it the fact that the transactions you participated kind of were deals that went up versus a short, or?
But most of them went up than shorts, truthfully, but the victim really, you could say it's the corporation, if you're taking assets belonging to the corporation, using it for personal gain. So if I buy stock, let's say a thin one, and my buying pushes the stock price, the deal that people have negotiated might not happen. The price might affect or something. So you are hurting that company that way. And the victims in our case, my friend's firm closed down Toronto. All the people that I visit, and the receptionists, other people, they all lost their jobs. Those are real victims. The family members, they were impacted directly. So there are victim is crime only in the sense that it's not like a blue collar robbery where I'm stealing your wallet. You're clearly a victim. This is like I'm doing a deal and I'm buying a stock that you were in the market in a sense selling. I didn't go knock on your door, hey, sell me your stock because it's tomorrow. Now you would never sell it if you knew what I did, but I was absorbing sales that were happening anyway.
We have another question online. Do you think the laws prohibiting insider trading should be changed?
Yeah, so if you really want to stop it, regulators stop this, we need to stop this. There's two things that are very easy to do. One, whistleblowers rules in Ontario, they didn't actually exist when I did it. And now they're like, you get back 10-15% of whatever you get from an inside trader if you whistleblow on them. I would say you get 100% of the profits from the regulators can claim from an inside trader. Because if you really want to stop it, you want to incentivize people to turn people in. Because in my case, I am probably way more valuable to a broker who has, let's say, $1 billion client or a hedge fund client than I am as a reward. Because if they turn me in, their career as a broker are probably over because I've turned into client. And whatever money they can get, it's a small percentage of that, and they have to discount that for time value of money because when they might get 2 or 3 years down the road, and then discount that amount for will they get it? So it's a much smaller amount in comparison to me being a source of inside information for them. That their reputation as a broker is higher because they're doing trades or giving advice that makes them look brilliant, or the big clients are giving deals that are making lots of money. So I would have whistleblower rules giving 100% to whoever identifies a whistleblower. Secondly, you would easily eliminate 90% inside trading on the one-off people who do overhear something or come across something. If before you trade, you have to say, maybe type in a statement or sign your name online or to your broker saying, I am not trading on material non-public information, and then just do it. That would eliminate, I'll scare away a lot. When I started, if someone said that to me, I said, whoa, geez, I am. I better not do that. I've just started my career. It's not worth $181. So that would have discouraged me right there. And then you can talk about maybe you allow it to some degree as long as you disclose ahead of time and you don't have to wait a certain amount of time for executives or things of that nature. You could do it, but you could eliminate 90% if you really wanted to that I think exists that is not being identified just by those small steps. Because it really would have scared us away in the beginning because we did it almost like a lark. Oh, this guy made a car money. Let's see what we can make. Let's try it. And if I'd known it's illegal and I have to make an affirmative statement that I know what I'm doing is illegal, for me, I would have not done that.
More of a opponent, Julian?
That was the last one online.
All right, well, on this point, like, clearly there's some of this going on in the market out there. You'd think that someone in your position would be, very well tuned as an advisor. And why would like the Ontario Securities Commission not hire you to sort of be like a consultant and show them where the problems are?
So when I was on parole, I wrote a letter to the Ontario Securities Commission. I said, I'm on parole downtown Toronto, close to your offices. I'd like to come in and talk to you for free to tell you what I think you did wrong in your interview. So for example, the one question, I'm being interviewed for days and they never asked me, who did you ever tell inside information to? They never asked that question, which is sort of an obvious question you would think. So I was going to say, these are the things I think you did wrong and these are the holes in your system that you could easily fill. Just because when they interviewed me over this time, I see what they're not asking me, which I think they should ask me. So I volunteered to talk about it. They thought about it and then they never got back to me. They said, okay, we have your letter, and then they never followed up with me. And I thought it was because of embarrassment. So to acknowledge that I did it for 15 years, they can learn from me, that means whoever was working there for 15 years, they screwed up for 15 years. So to bring me in is almost an indictment of people before, like the person could be new at the job, but to bring me in is an indictment of their predecessors, which they don't want to do. And in Canada, it's such a small community that they just don't want to embarrass someone else they might know at a different firm, or now they moved on to investment bank. It just, too many cans of worms are open up. So whereas the US, they bring in guys like me all the time to learn from it. I think they want to almost benchmark and say, what can I learn from this person that we can change? Whereas Canadians would say, well, I don't want anything to do with this guy. And the story I told you earlier, so when I got out, I found a firm downtown Toronto, a big firm. I had a chance to meet their partner in charge of education of their students. And I got a meeting with him and I said, look, I'd like to speak to your students for free, to tell them how I got into the white shoe story and to caution them about making a mistake that could lead to death. And he's thought about it, he goes, you know what? My guys in my firm, we're almost like, we're better than you. I'm not worried about anyone doing it. And if you talk to them, you might give them ideas. I said, okay. He was very disrespectful to me. I left. About 2 or 3 weeks later, one of their partners was charged with insider trading in that same firm. And he had stopped doing it. It was reported his last deal was the same week when I was charged. So my existing caused him to stop. And then he was doing it at that time independent of me. So I thought, they could have benefited from me, but I'd rather not hear from a criminal. I can't learn anything from a criminal. And the attitude in the US, much different.
Much different, right? And you think of like the Jordan Belfort story, right? He sort of gets out and does that.
Yeah.
So, well, I think one of the biggest impacts was on your family.
Yes.
Right? Probably very unintended. When you're doing it, you have no idea that this is going to kind of go down. So can you talk a bit about that?
Well, the hardest one, when my son was 13, he said, Dad, I don't want to see you again. I don't know if he was pressured by people at school to Google it up, or my ex-wife's family or whatnot. I said, I don't want to see you again. And I couldn't understand it, and I literally did not see him again. I went to court. I was rejected because we have a criminal record. It's very, you're biased against you. So for this period of time, I didn't have any contact with him whatsoever. I have a daughter that saw him, and I did relate to him through her, but no messages back to me, nothing. And this continued for years. I almost gave up hope, but at Christmas this year, my son, through my daughter, said, I want to see you, Dad. This is the first time. And we met. And my son is much larger than me. He's a very muscular guy. But he imagined me because he was smaller when we last saw each other, I was much bigger than him. So he had been told by my ex-wife's family that I had murdered my co-accused and that I was going to murder him. That's why they convinced him when he was a little boy to not see me. But he still wanted to see me. And so he's coming to this meeting thinking I'm going to kill him. And I'm going to the meeting thinking my son's going to beat me up. And we're both prepared to take this terrible fate just to see each other again. And we did, and we saw each other, and we cried right away, we hugged it out right away. And now my son, like a few months later, started living with me. So go from 6 years not seeing him at all, and now he lives with me. It was incredible. And so when I talked to sometimes religious groups about never losing hope, never losing faith, and I never did. I kept trying, and it whatever, my prayers, my dreams, they happened, and now I'm very, very happy.
Thank you. Glad to hear that. Anyone else in the room? Nearly out of time. Well, I think on that note, is there anything else parting words of wisdom you want to impart to us?
Well, my talk is maybe not black letter, it's not very dry, but I focus on the consequences. And you never know, I'm not saying anyone's gonna do what I do, but that's illegal, but even unethical or immoral, whatever you want, whatever standard you want to live a life, because you don't know where it's gonna go. And speaking personally, you don't want to live with that in your life, because whatever happens you think you're going to get from this illegality or immorality, it eats at you. If you're a somewhat moral person, it's going to eat at you, wear you out, so you don't enjoy what you're doing. And that's what happened to me. And that's why I'm very open when I talk to groups. There's never a question I won't answer, no matter how detailed, graphic. I'll probably talk to you later about something, because I don't want to leave anything on the table where I say, if I only said this story here or said this, I might have discouraged some person from doing something 10 years from now. So I'm always honest. So people, the next slide is my email address. If people have questions later on, I always answer questions. I often get questions later on. If people are too embarrassed to ask a question in a meeting, they'll email and say, what about this? What should I do this? And I always answer questions. I say confidentially, of course, because I think my friend is dead. And all these things are lost, and I want to take some good from it, because if I don't, then I'm left with nothing, just a negative. And I'm trying to make positives for my life as best as I can. And these type of talks and other things I do is the least I can do. So again, thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Joseph, for sharing your story with us. It's very touching, it's very powerful, and we're very glad to have you here. We're very happy to be supporting restorative housing justice in Ontario. I think that work is very important, and it's part of society that isn't necessarily as respected as it ought to be. So I want to thank you for that. Thank you for coming in here and sharing your experience with us.
Thank you very much. Thank you again. Thank you very much.